summit here, a person who works hard to make things happen, which, by the way, all these attributes are true of Amitabh. I've had the pleasure of knowing Amitabh for almost 3 decades. He's slightly older than I am. And what I've admired about him is his tenacity, intellectual rigor, and the most important thing, when it was a different era and a different government, his ability to make things happen. And it's very important that we have governments that make things happen, because they don't make things happen for themselves, they make things happen for us, for citizens of India. And I think this session is important because, Amitabh, what we want to cover over the next 30 minutes is the worldview of India now slowly emerging, not only as a developing economy, but also someone that's taken seriously at the high table of nations across the world. So I want to begin by asking you to demystify 3 things. G20, the importance of G20 in branding India both as a political and economic superpower, and what do you see are the most important challenges? A lot of the summits fail because they engage within the government, and the citizen is left disengaged, except that, traffic comes to a standstill for the citizen. What are the 3 things, and these 3, what are your views on this?
So, Sohail, let me first say that G20 is one body which comprises of both the most advanced nations in the world, that is the G7, plus emerging markets. Is a grouping which comprises about 85% of the global GDP. It comprises of about 78% of the global trade, 2/3 of the population, and almost about 95% of the patents and innovation are done in G20 countries. It's important because the United Nations is too large a body. It's not able to find solutions in today's complex world. G7 is too elitist. And it's too elitist because when several crises arose, like the Asian currency crisis, the Mexican peso crisis, the Russian financial crisis, the G7 realized that it's important to expand and cover the G20, and it was the initiative of the US president that G20 was then developed. So G20 is one body which is comprising of both advanced and emerging markets, and they are able to find very critical solutions to issues of economic growth, financial progress, social inclusion, many of these issues. The challenges are enormous. The challenges are enormous because by the time India takes over presidency, you will see that growth would have slowed down. There would be recession in several parts of the world. Global supply chains are disrupted. You have the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Climate action is very critical. And you have a scenario where growth with climate action and growth with equity, because SDGs, COVID has taken education, health, nutrition, all of them have regressed, they've not progressed. So the 2030 agenda of sustainable development goals, the world is way behind. You have to accelerate progress. So all these are challenges. And to the third point which you said, that unlike G20 is held in many other parts of the world, the Prime Minister is determined to make it into an event where the citizens of India are active participants, and therefore he's decided that G20 events would be held in every single state, every single union territory of India. And that would mean that the citizens of India and the states of India, the union territories of India, would be very active participants in both substantive issues as well as issues relating to participating in cultural fairs and in participating in handicrafts, exhibitions, many other ways where there would be very big stakeholders in this process.
Excellent. It would also give Arnab and his colleagues in the media some reprieve. For the last 8 months, we've been discussing G23. Now we'll at least focus on G20. But I want to come to the demystification part of it when you talk about events for the public and for the people. It's very important, and I have to say this as an outsider, I hate all political parties. What has happened in the last 8 years are three things. A, there's a pride about being Indian without the arrogance. And the pride is substantiated by data points that you mentioned, data points that Mo mentioned earlier. And you can see visible progress. It's a government that works hard. The second, which is a reality, is that the government has great individual communicators, but somehow the overarching communication of the government is poor, it's weak. The international outreach is weak. There's criticism, misplaced, not misplaced, but I think that needs some work. The third, which you very rightly mentioned, I genuinely believe that G20 is a great branding exercise for India, Indians, and Indianness. What are your views on that?
So Sohail, this is a unique opportunity. Firstly, it's a unique opportunity for every single visitor who comes to India to go back spiritually invigorated, mentally rejuvenated, and physically elevated as an Indian. He must go back being an Indian. That's important. The second important point is that it's also important to build the India narrative. A lot has been done in the last 7-8 years. And it's important to point out to the world that we've created digital public goods of the kind, building up individual identity, fast payments, consent-based empowerment on digital data, CoWIN, FASTags, the kind of digital public goods we've built up, we've demonstrated to the world that the digital public infrastructure, all the innovations have come from an emerging market and not from an advanced market, as distinct from the big tech innovation model of US and the GDPR market of the Europe, where privacy was there, but innovation was killed. But India has combined innovation with privacy, and therefore, huge amount of, we are far more digitally advanced. We do 7x of digital payment of what United States, Europe, and Canada do together. We do 3x of what China does in digital payments. It's also important to point out that we've done some remarkable work on infrastructure. We've provided piped water connection to 81 million houses. 81 million houses under the Jal Jeevan mission, which is like providing water connection to every single citizen of Brazil. We provided 30 million houses under the Awas Yojana, which is like providing house to the entire population of Australia. Entire population of Australia. And we've done 50,000 kilometers of roads, which is like building roads all through the European Union. Now, these are very major achievements in the last 7 to 8 years of this government, which need to be highlighted and pointed out to the world that there has been a radical transformation in terms of housing, in terms of electricity, in terms of providing LED bulbs, in terms of a huge transformation that has taken place. So I'm a great believer that the story of India has just begun. It is not just the decade of this is not just the decade of India, but this is going to be India's century in the coming years.
So, this is exactly what I was alluding to. People buy benefits. Brands are all about benefits. You don't buy Colgate, you buy the whitest teeth. You don't buy Surf, you buy the whitest wash. What you're saying has a duality in terms of the narrative. All the things that you talked about have actually transformed India and are transformational for the world to see about India. My personal view is that this is the narrative that now needs to be played out. We need to somehow wrap this in in quasi-emotional speak. Like, for instance, what you just said about Brazil, providing drinking water to every citizen of Brazil. The giganticism of the task that this government has undertaken and achieved is not known. Because our media, other than Republic, of course, is so busy worrying about, contentious issues on a daily basis. I don't blame them. But some of these stories have not found their way either in the Indian narrative within India or in the narrative about India in the West. How do you believe this is going to change? Because I know you've done remarkable work with Incredible India, where you got partners. I remember many, many years ago doing this phrase where Amitabh was also there. I wrote something called India Everywhere for Davos. If you remember, at that time we took buses, we took hoardings, we took everything to let the world know. Now today you're going to have 20 of the world's leading, most powerful leaders coming into India. What's that narrative going to play out before and after think?
So Sohail, 2 points on that. One is that you will have all the top leaders, the finance ministers, the external affairs ministers, the central bank governors, the Sherpas, everyone in India. It's very important to put out data points. Talking in generalities doesn't help. Quite often we talk in generalities. We should actually put out with clear facts and figures the transformation that has taken place. Secondly, we must get, like I ran a program called the Aspirational Districts of India, which covered the most backward, 115 of the most backward districts of India. In 3.5 years' time, we transformed them simply because of data points. We got real-time data, we put the ranking in public domain, the districts competed, and all the aspirational districts, simply because of data and real-time data and competition, transformed themselves. Because we were naming and shaming them on outcome basis. This government has moved away from physical and financial achievement, and I've been 42 years in government, so I've worked with different governments. The earlier governments used to work on physical and financial achievements. This government has moved to outcomes and outputs. And therefore, these outcomes were put out in public domain, and we were naming and shaming the collectors, and because it was naming and shaming, and public data was being put out in public domain, they were able to then compete and transform 22% of India's population at the grassroots level. There are many such transformational stories. For instance, we do the Ayushman Bharat scheme. We are covering 500 million Indians digitally for health insurance. 500 million Indians means more than the population of USA and Europe put together. Now, that is the transformation. You can be in Bihar, moving to Tamil Nadu, you'll carry your health insurance with you. Now, this is transformational. You've heard about the Obama healthcare and how it failed. But India has done this successfully, digitally. We did the CoWIN, all digitally linked to your passport. And therefore, these are the stories of transformation which must be put out in public domain with data points. And there are many, many, for instance, the aspirational districts, the UNDP said it's a model which needs to be replicated in all over Latin America and all over Africa to transform these countries. And that is what needs to be talked about.
So it's interesting that you mention and you do talk about 42 years in government. When I look back, and this is not because this government is in power and we have to be nice to them. We don't have to be nice to anyone because they all tax you equally. But when you look at this government, and when I say this government, the first term and now, the single difference is that things are happening. People are working, but most importantly, there's accountability. What do you think has changed? Has there been more citizenry pressure because of the media? Is there greater awareness? Is there greater accountability? Is there greater involvement? When you look back at a very good career that you've had as a bureaucrat, what do you think has changed? Because obviously the politician has changed, the citizen has changed, and hopefully the bureaucrat has changed. What do you think, when you look back, what has been this transformation within India?
So firstly, I think it's Prime Minister's own focus on governance. He's a politician when he campaigns during election, but he's very, very focused when he's doing governance. Other than election time, he's actually a hardcore taskmaster at governance, and a very tough hard master on governance issues. He focuses on outcomes. Secondly, I think he's basically a technocrat at heart. And therefore, he's pushed the digital story of India in a very big way. And he's really, really a techie at heart, pushing digitization across every single sector. I mean, imagine a scheme like Swanidhi scheme. He's saying, we will provide this benefit if the street vendors do digital transactions. Look at the GST, the goods and services tax. Totally digital, totally paperless, totally cashless. You're tracking down everything. So each one of the schemes are getting implemented, which are look at COVID, totally digital, unlike the Western world. And therefore, every single scheme is digital, which is enabling us to pole vault, not just leapfrog, but pole vault. And that is what gives me the confidence that with a young population, with technology, you are going to, in the coming years, you'll accelerate the pace of growth because you've carried out major structural reforms in your economy. You've carried out the GST, you've brought in the IBC, you've redefined your MSMEs, you've enabled, look at many of our startups. When I started, when we all worked on the Startup India movement and PM launched it, there were 118 startups. Today we have 80,000 startups with over 110 unicorns. Now, these are the ones who are really transforming on the basis of, now many of these startups are doing, look at the fintech revolution. They are doing lending based on digital cash flows. Many of them like Zerodha, etc., are doing wealth management and creation. Look at Digit and Go Digit, all of them are doing insurance. When I was in Kerala, I was an officer working in the traditional fisheries sector. My job was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen. So we gave them outboard motors, we gave them new fishing crafts, we gave them new fishing nets, but opening them bank accounts, because they were prone to drinking, trying to open their bank account used to take me 9 months. Today we open a bank account in less than 1 minute. That has been the transformational story of India. From 9 months to 1 minute. And that is why between 2014 and 2018, every second bank account opened was in India. And when the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana was started, the PMJDY accounts, only 19% of them were of women. The study which has just come out, 56% of the bank accounts belong to women of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. So imagine the transformation. And what you've done to, what you're doing to women-led development.
So this is an aware audience. I mean, this is not an audience that is not aware. And be honest, nothing is being recorded for posterity. If you knew all these facts, actually I'll reverse it. How many of you didn't know each of these data points? You didn't know. I mean, so point is, there is a communication lag which needs to be plugged. I want to now come to level 2. A lot of economists, both in-house and people who practice economics with taxi drivers, keep talking about joblessness and jobless growth, and keep talking about the fact that, oh, there's a high level of unemployment. Earlier, a speaker mentioned that we would be the world's largest population in another 2-3 years. Where do you see the challenges of unemployment, growth, aspiration, and how do you see that whole axis playing out?
So Suhail, I'm a great believer in accelerating the process of growth. When Prime Minister talks about becoming a developed nation by 2047, he's basically saying that you have to transform India in 1 generation. In 1 generation. Now, some countries in Asia have done this earlier. But that would mean that India needs to grow rapidly to be able to grow with jobs. You create jobs not by distributing poverty. You create jobs by distributing growth. And therefore, we need to understand that if you grow at 6%, your $3 trillion economy would be a $14 trillion economy. If you grow at 8%, it will be a $22 trillion economy. But if you grow at 10%, you will be a $34 trillion economy. And you would have taken your per capita income from $2,100 to close to $25,000, bringing prosperity to every citizen of India. You will make him more advanced than anybody else. And that is the prosperity we need. And that means that India needs to fire on all cylinders. Not just services growth, it needs to fire on manufacturing, it needs to fire on agriculture, it needs to fire on urbanization, sustainable urbanization. And the challenge for India is that not only that we need to go digital, which we've done very successfully, we also need to be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing. And this, to my mind, is a huge, it's not a challenge, it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to technologically leapfrog.
So let me ask you, and you can please be honest on this one. Who and what are the lag points? What are the things that are drawing us back from achieving this? Politics apart, and political compulsions apart, what do you think are the 3-4 things that are actually holding us back from achieving this? And be as brutally honest as you want to be.
Yeah, so first and foremost, growth of a country is dependent on its states. And therefore, it's very important that states must become the key drivers of growth. States need to accelerate the pace of growth, much like what Gujarat did. For 10 years in a row, it grew at about 11% plus. You need 10 Indian states to be growing at 10% plus. That's critical to my mind. That's critical, 10 Indian states. Secondly, you need, in the central and the eastern part of India, you need states to talk a different language, move away from agriculture. And it's important because in India, 18% of your agriculture with 43% of your population in agriculture, low productivity jobs. These, without smart urbanization, it'll be impossible to grow rapidly. And I'm saying this because look at Uttar Pradesh. Gautam Budh Nagar, which is Noida and Greater Noida, is GDP of one district is 10x of what the second district Kanpur does. 10x of Kanpur. The GDP of Mumbai alone, one city, is more than the GDP of Uttar Pradesh. And therefore, smart urbanization backed by good manufacturing is the response to this. Without this, you need all these states, Uttar Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar, all of them to drive the growth momentum. And that will create the jobs for you.
Yeah, but you see, the counter argument of this is always that the states, the places you mentioned, including, including Noida, have had a historical legacy. Mumbai has always been the commercial capital. The trick is to make semi-urban centers smart cities or urban-centric or urban-focused, as you mentioned. We are not focusing as much on the really small cities. I've worked across sectors. The Coimbatores of the world, the Ludhianas, have always generated a huge amount of revenue. But we need to spread that goodness. The antecedents, for those of you who are from Bengal, the antecedents of the Naxalite movement began because there was migration from rural to urban because of a paucity of jobs. So one point is obviously states. But Amitabh, states will always have political compulsions. Some people, and it's really tragic, I don't want to mention names, some states, at the cost of their own citizens, are opposing goodness for just petty partisan political reasons. That's not going to change in a hurry.
So the point about that is that good economic growth and good governance must become good politics in this.
Absolutely. And I think, to be fair to Narendra Modi and to be fair to a lot of state chief ministers, they are recognizing today that ultimately people want food on the table, a dignity of livelihood, and something to be aspirational about. I want to wind down and ask you, I think we have 5 more minutes, to ask you the last question. After G20 is over, and I know we will have a stunning presidency, because everything will hopefully fall in place. I can see the infrastructural part develop. I can see the processes develop. The digitization of India has been more than remarkable. When you look back at the next 2-3 years, because 5 years is too long a horizon, what's the India you dream of? Because you've been part of that incredible India, no pun intended. You've been part of that incredible India's journey. So when you actually demit office at the end of your presidency and move into yet another government appointment, which I'm sure will come your way because you've been good at it, where do you see India in the next 2-3 years?
So Sohail, first of all, it's important for every Indian to look at a much longer perspective rather than just 2 to 3 years. And it's important, I would say 3 decades. Prime Minister has defined it as 2047. India needs to do a 9 to 10% rate of growth year after year, year after year, year after year. This would require, much like what Prime Minister has aimed at, a huge amount of structural reforms on a constant basis. It would require massive productivity enhancement. It would require a huge focus on massive use of going digital and going green. And it would require a huge focus on getting into sunrise areas of growth. It's important to understand this because India has been focusing on textiles, food processing, which are important from a job perspective. But we must understand that the sale of mobiles is more than the sale of automobiles today. So you have to get into renewable, you have to get into battery storage, you have to get into electric mobility, you have to make the quantum leap forward in all these artificial intelligence and machine learning. And these are the areas which will spur your growth rate to high levels and create completely new jobs, because I think we must understand one thing, that India will be accounting for 25 to 30% of the skilled manpower of the world by 2047. And therefore, we require new skills and completely new skills which will take on the rest of the world. This is our opportunity to capture the world and penetrate the world.
I would just add one thing to that. Before you commence on Atma Nirbharta, there has to be Atma Vishwas. And today what we are seeing is a greater quotient of Atma Vishwas. The average Indian is more confident, he's more capable. Hopefully the impoverishment of opportunities will diminish. I generally believe every country has poverty. Where we have suffered is we've denied equal opportunity to a large mass of people, which, as you rightly said, is disappearing. You know, when I look at India from a business perspective, from a perspective of dealing with so many businesses both here and overseas, I just don't see a great country. I see a great people. I see a people who are not only going to be more confident, they're going to be more concerned, they're going to be more compassionate, they're going to be more global. Because in addition to our economic prowess comes our civilizational legacy. When you combine civilization with commerce, it's a win-win. That's the India I see. And I hope that every one of us sees it with the same thought, maybe not in the same contours. And I generally believe, Amitabh, people like you, people like the Prime Minister, people who serve at the district level, people who give up their tomorrows so that our todays look good, our caregivers, our lifesavers, these are the people who make us who we are. The person who comes and fixes things at your house so that your technology is never disabled. People in the media who inform you so that you can make an informed choice. And for that, India, let's all pray and hope. And thank you, Amitabh. We wish you the very best during the next 1 year and even more for the rest of your career and the rest of your life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kant and Suhail, for that fabulous conversation. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, our next discussion on Mission Superpower, surpassing or bypassing China, will discuss how far is India from surpassing China. With India churning out more unicorns than the neighboring country, with our population increasing and surpassing China's by 2023, India is set to grow faster than ever. But will New Delhi surpass Beijing or bypass it? Let's discuss. Here's a short audiovisual.
India is taking on China militarily. India is taking on China diplomatically. And economically, the story is no different. India is leading the pack as the fastest growing economy. We have emerged as a semiconductor and electronics manufacturing hub. We have outpaced China to add 14 new unicorns in 6 months. With China predicted to grow slower than rest of Asia, the winds are clearly blowing towards India. Will New Delhi surpass Beijing or bypass it? Joining us at India Economic Summit 2022 is Shri Sanjeev Sanyal. He is part of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, and he will talk about India's roadmap in surpassing or bypassing China.
We've got from Republic Media Network, Abhishek Kapoor, Senior Executive Editor, and Rhythm Bharadwaj, Executive Editor, Law and Governance, who will moderate the